The issue of asymptomatic transmission, you're absolutely right, is a similarly huge myth. And it's amazing to look at the origins of that. So the origins, from what I can tell, well, there's two basically. Intuition. So there was just this intuitive sense that, a lot of transmission was happening from people who are asymptomatic. And then there was an article published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, because it was May of last year, that purported to do two things and mush them together. So one thing they did sort of okay, although there's some methodological criticisms, but I think it wasn't too bad. They tried to estimate what proportion of all infected people were asymptomatic carriers. And they said roughly, give or take, around 40% or so, maybe about half even. And that's probably about right. And then they also asserted that therefore a huge number of the infections that were happening were due to asymptomatic spreaders. And the data source for that was like pathetic, like with a capital P. I mean, it was basically, they made it look like they were citing data, but when you actually analyze the article, they were citing a non-peer-reviewed report from some researchers in Italy who studied like 10 people who appeared to have been infected with coronavirus, and 2 or 3 of them may have been infected. The author said may have been infected by asymptomatic carriers. So 2 or 3 people in Italy that might have been infected by asymptomatic became CDC, Dr. Fauci, everybody saying about half of all transmission is happening from asymptomatic carriers. It's absolutely unbelievable. So I wrote a letter to the editor, posted online, saying the article should either be withdrawn or at least corrected. To their credit, the journal did publish an article and published about 5 other letters from people that were very critical of the piece. So to their credit, at least they published our pieces, but although they didn't appear in print till almost like 8 or 9 months later or something. But they didn't retract the article, and maybe it wouldn't have mattered because it's just like the surface thing. Once it got out there, right, that was it. The other thing, and I talk about this in my book, is shortly after that article was published, there was a press conference at the WHO, at the World Health Organization, and one of their coronavirus experts, an American woman actually, was asked, because this paper had just been published or online, and she was asked about asymptomatic transmission, and she said, no, we've looked at that really carefully at the WHO, and we think it's extremely rare. It probably happens, but it's very rare. Well, this poor woman, I can't pronounce her name. That's a Dutch name, I think, Maria something, with a K. She was just crucified in the media, and again by the experts like Dr. Fauci and others, and by the CDC. And they all said, what are you talking about? You are so wrong. And the WHO took a huge amount of flack. A lot of the confusion, of course, is that we have symptomatic transmission. So people that are coughing or sneezing and spreading the virus, right? And that was clear that was going on. And then we have this very important piece, which does make COVID a bit different than other respiratory infections. Not unique at all, but which is what we call pre-symptomatic transmission. So these are people that are about to become symptomatic. They're about to start sneezing and coughing, and they're in the 24 to 48 hour window before that. So they technically don't have symptoms yet, or they're not aware that they have symptoms, and they are contagious. And there's no doubt about that. And so those two kind of got lumped together, and you could kind of see why. It's not nefarious. How do you know? It's true, you can't easily know if someone's a pre-symptomatic transmitter or an asymptomatic transmitter until they become symptomatic. Then you know that they were pre-symptomatic. If they never become symptomatic, then you know they were asymptomatic all along. And that created confusion. And so when people were attacking the WHO, and this scientist in particular, they were saying, no, look at all these cases. And they were citing cases of pre-symptomatic transmission calling that asymptomatic. And then WHO had to kind of backpedal and say, oh, no, no, blah, blah, blah. So it all got mushy and complicated.
Yeah. And I
But
certainly
even
remember that.
to this day, there are very few documented cases of truly asymptomatic people transmitting. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, we think children are such inefficient transmitters, because the vast majority of children tend to be asymptomatic transmitters. They never become symptomatic. There was a study published in Nature, the journal Nature, many months ago from Wuhan, China, where they looked at thousands and thousands of contacts of asymptomatic people, and they didn't find a single case of ongoing transmission. In other words, none of those asymptomatic carriers that actually transmitted to anyone else.